Listen to The Astonishing Junk Drawer exclusively at patreon.com/astonishinglegends.
Is anyone here? I don't even know. I hope they are.
Hashtag ontological shook.
Who wrote Wine Country with Emily? Liz Kukowski. Speaking of blue entities, have you seen the documentary The Nightmare?
Oh yes, I've learned that this is part of my astral plane, but I spelled it Plain.
No rules on the junk drawer.
I didn't talk about my actual abduction.
I'm thrilled to hear the point of view from you. Any thoughts or news on the South American alien mummy?
Astonishing Legends would like to thank Squarespace, BetterHelp, Skylight Frame, Policy Genius, Masterclass, Uncommon Goods, our contributors at patreon.com, and you, our listeners, for making tonight's show possible.
On June 11th, 1980, at around 4 in the afternoon, Police Constable Alan Godfrey was called to investigate a dead body found in a coal yard in Todmorden, England. Todmorden, or Todd as the locals call it, is a pretty quiet little village in West Yorkshire. The son of the owner of a coal yard had called it in, and when Constable Godfrey arrived, he told him, "It's up on the top," explaining that the body rested on top of a 15-foot high pile of coal. Godfrey proceeded to climb the coal pile, where he was met with the open eyes and startled face of a dead man. He appeared to have been frozen forever in sheer terror. There was no obvious sign of injury beyond several small burn marks near the base of his skull and on the neck. They were roughly 2 inches long and 1.5 inches across, and Godfrey described them as weeping wounds covered with some kind of green ointment, a substance that remains unidentified to this day. Strangest of all, the body seemed to have been placed on top of the pile of coal. There was no evidence of the victim having climbed up there. On top of that, Godfrey noted that he was laying on his back, with his arms carefully placed on his stomach, as though he simply laid down to take a nap. It took a little time to figure out who the man was, as his wallet was missing. As was, oddly, his shirt, even though he had a jacket and a mesh tank top on. It was as if he'd been redressed quickly after his death, possibly by someone who didn't really understand how clothes worked. In addition to that, his hair seemed to be freshly cut. The victim turned out to be Zigmund Adamski, and he didn't even live in Todmorden. He lived over 20 miles away. He was happily married and had been missing for 5 days after having gone for groceries near his house. Again, 20 miles away in the village of Tingley. His family had been frantically searching for him. He even missed his goddaughter's wedding, for which he'd already written a speech. The true crime portion of this story is still unsolved and technically a cold case at nearly 44 years old. How in the world did a 56-year-old man wind up dead, in repose, except for the look of terror on his face, missing his shirt but not his jacket, on a pile of furnace-side smokeless coal? All of this without any evidence of having climbed up there on his clothes or shoes, which, by the way, he would have had to do in broad daylight, albeit on a rainy day, sometime between 8:15 a.m. and 3:45 p.m. So far, this sounds like just a really unusual cold case, right? Shouldn't it be on a true crime podcast? Well, yes, it should, and it has been on many of them. But everything you've heard up until this moment is less than half the story, and that's why it's tonight's Astonishing Legend.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Coroner James Turnbull from the pilot for the British TV show Strange But True, which aired May 21st, 1993.
This was one of the most puzzling cases that I've come across in 25 years.
Join us tonight for part 1 of our 2-part series on the mysterious circumstances surrounding Zigmund Adamski's unsolved murder in 1980.
And we're back. That we are, folks. Wow, this is an exciting two-part series. It's something we wanted to cover for ages, but are only just now getting around to. And the time must have been right because a lot of fortuitous things fell into place for this to be great.
Yes, a lot of shows of our kind have covered Zigmund Adamski. However, we're betting the overwhelming majority of you probably haven't heard of him. And even some of you who think you have are probably thinking of one of the more controversial and famous UFO contactees in history, George Adamski. Remember the 4 Georges we talked about in the UFOs and the Occult? Well, this is a different person, case and legend entirely.
Yes, it is. Instead of the 4 Georges, we're now on to the 2 Adamskis. A few quick announcements. We made a big announcement about the knit caps or beanies a few weeks ago, and then the batch we had gotten turned out to be janky, so we had to order another batch, and by the time this show airs, they might be in the store, and if they're not, they will be soon.
Well, the catch is, in the intervening time, the hat people sold out of the navy blue color. So now we have a new color, which I kind of like better. We have the blue, and then we have a smoke gray. So keep an eye on the store for those if you want some for this winter. It may be a little difficult to promise them by Christmas at this point in terms of shipping, but give it a shot.
Also, all of the face-melting old logo mugs are in the store now in 4 different colors. This is old school stuff, so look for those. They are only $4, speaking of 4 different colors, because the face might melt off. Caveat emptor. Yes, just make sure you read the description on those real well, because, just read it. And soon we'll be getting in some of the other stuff, like these blanket Fortiana pints that the label came out a little too dark on, etc. So we got another batch. So long and short is, get over to the store if you're looking for either some bargains or also some stuff that was out of stock, because several things have come back in.
Yes, it's a seconds and a regular sale.
Yes.
And in other news, we're about to join our good friend Jim Harold for a UFO roundtable he's hosting, along with a few of our other mutual friends that he'll be posting on December 26th. So keep an eye on his social media for that. And of course, we'll remind everyone.
Yes, and last thing, this is the first of 3 shows in a row, and then we'll be dark until January 13th. That's really only 2 dark weeks before we're back on the 3rd week with the first show of 2024. I can't make any promises, but we may release another junk drawer to the main feed during that time, which are generally exclusive to Patreon, but we don't want folks to get bored, so we'll see what we can do.
And if you haven't already, find and subscribe to the 2 other shows on the Astonishing Legends Network. Well, we got a network, I guess.
Yeah, we got a network.
The Midnight Library and the new show called Scared All the Time. Alrighty, folks, that's enough housekeeping. So let's get into tonight's show.
Our guest tonight is Philip Mantle, and we have to thank our good friend Paul Gledhill of the anomaly.co.uk podcast for connecting us with Mr. Mantle on extremely short notice. He is a world-renowned British author, publicist, lecturer, broadcaster, and UFO UAP researcher. He started researching UFOs in 1979 when he joined the British UFO Research Association, or BUFORA, which you've heard us mention numerous times on the show. At that time, he also became a member of the Yorkshire UFO Society, or UFOS, where in 1985 he was nominated as Investigator of the Year. 2 years later, in 1987, he was appointed to the Council of Management for BUFORA and subsequently acted as press officer, conference organizer, and secretary to the National Investigations Committee. Next year, in 1988, he was appointed as England's representative for the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. And in 1992, he was awarded an honorary membership in the Research Institute on Anomalous Phenomena, another organization we've mentioned on the show before. It is a science-based UFO study group in Ukraine. The year after that, he became director of investigations for BUFORA, where he'd been for 13 years by that time. And in the ensuing years, he stepped down from many of these positions because he'd gotten so busy professionally, although he maintains his membership in RAIP, the science-based UAP research group we mentioned earlier out of Ukraine. He's been published in dozens of magazines, journals, and papers, including The Guardian, and has lectured on as many broadcast TV and radio shows running in all over the world, really. And in the past, he has been in senior editorial positions at numerous magazines and UAP-related blogs, and in 2015, launched his own publishing house, Flying Disc Press. Philip received a UFO Researcher Award from UFO Norway in 1994, as well as an award for 40 years of research from Outer Limits magazine in 2019, and as if that wasn't enough, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy of Paranormal Arts and Sciences in 2020. He's published over 30 books in at least 6 different languages around the world, and in fact made a deal just yesterday to publish a new French edition of one of them, titled Without Consent. That one actually contains Police Constable Alan Godfrey's account of his personal encounter with a UFO, 5 months after he investigated Zigmund Adamski's death. And tonight, Philip is here with us to talk about one of the most baffling cold case murders in history and its possible connection to the UAP phenomenon. Philip, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good evening, gentlemen. My pleasure, I can assure you.
Well, I hope I got all of that right. Didn't make any mistakes in there. You have quite a lot of accolades and experience. There was a lot of details to sort.
Yeah, I've been around, as they say. Yes.
All right, Philip, I can imagine that you probably have numerous connections with the Adamski case. What can you tell us about those connections and why you would be the man to talk to about this?
Zigmund Adamski, back in the day when he disappeared, lived in a small place called Tingley in West Yorkshire in England. It's just about 4 or 5 miles from the city of Leeds. Well, I also lived in Tingley at the same time. And I was approximately about a mile from Mr. Adamski's location. The high school that I went to is literally right behind where he lives. There's the school, then there's the school football fields. And I used to take a shortcut home on a night across the football fields, which would literally bring me out at the grocer's shop where Mr. Adamski was heading that day. I'd walk the further mile down the road to where I lived. It's a busy place. For those in this part of the country, the major motorway network from east to west is the M62. Well, there's a major junction right there where Mr. Adamski lives, literally within a stone's throw. And one of the other major motorways that goes from north to south is the M1, which is, again, just a mile or so down the road from where he lived. And even today, it's a very, very busy location. My oldest daughter, still lives in the house that I lived in, a mile and a half away with her family and husband. And not only that, my stepfather, God rest him, he's no longer with us, but he was called Bruno Szynkowski, and he was also Polish, like Mr. Adamski was, and he worked with him at Lofthouse Colliery, just outside of Wakefield in West Yorkshire. I call him my father rather than my stepfather, but my father never learnt to drive, so on occasion, Mr. Adamski would call at our house to pick my father up to take him to work. I didn't know him personally. I knew him to say hello to, and that was about it. And of course, I just joined the Yorkshire UFO Society, which was based in Leeds, round about the time that Mr. Adamski disappeared. And a few months further on, of course, was the Alan Godfrey case. So I was kind of in the ideal place, if you like. I could take you to Mr. Adamski's house now. It's still there. The shop, the little grocer's where he was going to the last time I was there, which is a couple of years back, was a little nail bar. Whether that survived the pandemic shut down, I don't know, but it was no longer a grocer's. But the building is still there. If not, it'll be a house or something else. And at the end of the road, you kind of turn off a main road to go to where Adamski lived. But that is a cul-de-sac, so there's no out at the end. And there used to be a very large restaurant at the end. I worked there at one point during the school holidays. My friend was a chef there. That's no longer there. That's been demolished, but it's still a dead end. It's still a cul-de-sac. So I know the location. I know the story. I knew Mr. Adamski to say hello to. Like I said, he wasn't a friend. I never had a conversation with him because he would literally pull up outside the house and my father would get in the car and off they go to work. Usually that was early morning, so I never saw them anyway, but they used to work different shifts. So sometimes I would see him pick my father up or, on an afternoon to do an afternoon shift and that kind of thing, I was in the right place. That's why I think, I've got some information that might be of interest.
Well, I can't wait to hear it. And another thing that we wanted to point out to our listeners, we have covered something in the past, and I thought it was interesting because you live just, about 10 minutes from the Black Monk of Pontefract?
Yes, I do. I live in Pontefract in West Yorkshire, famous for the Black Monk, yes.
That's pretty great. We had a lot of fun covering that. We did an in-depth series on that a few years ago. So that I thought that was interesting. Now, how far is it now from where you're at now to where Adamski lived?
It's just a couple of minutes down the motorway. I'm at 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
Like I said, my daughter still lives at the house that we have there.
Right.
And literally, I'm a mile from the motorway, the M62, and I think we go 3 or 4 junctions, and I'm there. I'm there in no time at all.
That's great. Okay, so next question, I guess, then is, can you tell our listeners about what we want to talk about first is actually the discovery of Adamski's body and how that story came to pass?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was in June 1980 that Adamski was found on a coal tip, if I'm right, in Todmorden.
Yes.
Todmorden is about 20 miles or so from Tingley. Todmorden lies right on the border with the next county over, which is Lancashire. Down the centuries, that border has changed slightly. Sometimes it was in Lancashire, sometimes mainly it was in West Yorkshire. It's a hill town. It's surrounded by moors and so on is Todmorden. Nice place, been there several times. So at the time, you have to bear in mind, Mr. Adamski was originally from Poland. His wife was also Polish. And some of the family relatives were over from Poland for a family wedding. Now, in 1980, of course, Poland was still part of the Eastern Bloc countries, the Warsaw Pact. I think the Solidarity movement was just gaining initiative in Poland, but it hadn't quite made its breakthrough that it did some years later. And I think he'd been out that day, and he decided to go to the local corner shop, as we would call it. I think he was after some potatoes, to be honest. And it is literally a short walk from his house. His house is off the main stretch where it goes up. It's round the corner. So you just literally walk round the corner and up the road, and there it is. I believe he even managed to get to the shop and purchase some potatoes, and he never made it back home. I mean, he literally disappeared. He ended up, I think it was 5 days later, on a coal tip in Todmorden, right next to the railway station, or the railway yard there. His shirt had been removed, although he still had his jacket and trousers on, and he had a strange burn mark down the back of his head onto his neck. And I believe someone had been in the coal yard earlier that day and didn't notice anything. But he was found by a local man. They called the police, obviously. And of course, the local policeman who was on duty at that time, in fact, there were 2 of them, but the one that we're all familiar with was PC Alan Godfrey. I've met the other police officer, but I can't remember his name. And of course, they examined the body. There was an inquest because it was a mysterious death. And the coroner said he died of either a heart attack or heart failure. And that was the end of it. His body, strangely enough, was shipped back to Poland for burial. And like my stepfather, who was from Poland, Mr. Adamski had said he'd never wanted to go back to Poland again. He'd made his life here. My father fought in the military during the war and was demobbed in Scotland at the end of the war and lived here the rest of his life, But Mrs. Adamski, apparently she wanted, for some reason, to go back to Poland, but he said, I'm not going. He was shipped off and buried in Poland, and I think she followed not long after. So if you wanted to make any further inquiries about a suspicious death, there was no chance of doing so because he was gone. He was in the Eastern Bloc, and that was it, over and done with. And that's how it died. It stayed that way as a mysterious disappearance with in inverted commas, a conventional outcome, a mysterious death, but not. So whilst they said he died of a heart failure or a heart attack, it's not the coroner's job to figure out how the hell he got from Tingley to Todmorden and where the hell was he in those missing 5 days. The coroner's duty is to find out the cause of death. And that's what they did. And that was it, over and done with, So it left people scratching their head. But like I said, his family was gone, and that was it. That's how it ended up.
So when you say a coal tip, it's a pile of coal, right?
It's a pile of coal because, we still use coal for a whole host of things in those days. In fact, as a man who worked down the coal mines, my father worked down the mines all his life. Part of his salary, if you want to call it that, is we used to get free coal. So, our house had a big oven, a big fire, and we would use coal to fuel it. And at one point, literally a truck would come and they'd dump a ton of coal on our driveway. And my father and my brother used to shovel it into a wheelbarrow, and we had a storage place. We call it a coal cellar to keep the coal. Now, one of the things that people have commented on about the location of Mr. Adamski's body is that there were no marks on this coal tip. It was if he'd just been dropped from the sky. Well, as a kid, I jumped on the coal tip. I got a thick ear for it now and again, because I got mucky. But when you come down the coal tip, the coal kind of falls down after you. It doesn't always leave any sign that you've been there at all. It's just the way that it reacts. Thankfully, in later years, they then started to bring the coal in sacks, and then we'd put it in our coal house for us. So, yeah, coal was still used in industry at that time, so it wasn't anything unusual. But the fact is, there is no connection that I'm aware of between Tingley and Todmorden, apart from the fact they both begin with T, So where he was in those 5 days was open to speculation, but that wasn't the coroner's job. Coroner's job to say, how did this man die? There was no sign of any foul play. They couldn't identify this material that was on the back of his neck and this burn mark, but nonetheless, it was a conventional explanation for his death.
Let me see if I'm understanding you correctly. You're saying a lot of people seem to fixate on the fact that it seemed like it wasn't clear that a path had been made to take his body up there, or he had climbed up there. You're saying that wouldn't have necessarily happened based on your experience of climbing on coal tips yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I was a mischievous kid. You got this huge ton of coal in your front yard.
Yeah.
Then it's inviting, it's exciting for a kid to jump all over it,
Sure.
Then my mother would go mad because I was covered in coal dust. But there was literally no sign you'd been anywhere near it, because the coal it's in big lumps, about that big. It would just roll down behind you, and that was it.
Right. So that's one thing that a lot of people fixate on. And what you're saying is, I don't necessarily think it would have been clear if somebody had dragged him up there or he had dragged himself up there. Conversely, though, his clothes were supposedly pretty clean and his body didn't seem like he had struggled his way up the coal tip himself.
It was obvious, and Alan Godfrey commenting on this, it seemed that wasn't his place of death.
Yeah.
Wherever Mr. Adamski had been, he passed away somewhere else, and his body dumped there. But there was no evidence to show that either. It was just an idea, if you like. But again, that wasn't the coroner's job. Where he'd been, where he died, how he got there was not part of the coroner's decisions. It was just to figure out how he died. And of course, his wife didn't put any pressure on the police, didn't cause say, he'd been kidnapped or anything like that. So, they were all happy, washed their hands of it, and it was over and done with, because he was gone and she was gone as well. And they were back in Poland. And even if you did think this was foul play, well, there was nothing you could do about it anyway. They're gone.
Have you started the bulk of your holiday shopping yet?
Well, a little here and there. Why do you ask?
Because, before you do any more, I would like to strongly make a suggestion that you give yourself the gift of insane savings this holiday season with Mint Mobile's best wireless deal of the year.
You know what? After you and I saw how much money we were wasting from a decade and more of overpaying for the same or worse service with the big name carriers, the fees, the overages, the not so transparent taxes, and the oh so apparent awful customer service, we felt like we were not in our right minds wasting all that money. That could have been going for presents for people we love, or even ourselves.
Yeah, tell me about it. Wait, you just did. Never mind. Well, look, we can't beat ourselves up too much because a lot of that was before Mint Mobile existed. But we've been with them from early on, and we've always been mindful and grateful about how much we've saved over the years. Like thousands, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thousands upon thousands. I've done the math before. And if you in the audience out there are tired of overpaying and would like a little more cash in your holiday kitty, well, here's your chance. Because right now, when you switch to Mint Mobile and buy any 3-month plan, you'll get another 3 months for free. That's 6 months of premium wireless service for the price of 3.
It's a holiday miracle and the easiest way to save money this season because Mint Mobile lets you order and activate from home while saving tons on phone plans starting at just $15 a month. Seriously, I can't think of a better gift than turning an overpriced wireless bill into just $15 a month with Mint Mobile. Think about it. You'll be saving right into summer of next year. It's giving us a head start on next year's budget, and Mint Mobile can do that for you too. Don't wait for a better deal, folks, because Mint Mobile's best offer of the year is here. For a limited time, buy any 3-month plan and get 3 more months free.
I already said that, but I'm going to quote Jack White here from the White Stripes. It bears repeating now, but going online only and eliminating the traditional costs of retail, Mint Mobile passes significant savings on to you.
Well, if you weren't going to do that impression, I was going to. Well, all plans come with unlimited talk and text, plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network.
Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and switch easily and effortlessly with eSIM.
Or if you need a new device for a limited time, get 6 months of free service when you buy a select device and plan.
Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month.
For a limited time, buy any 3-month Mint Mobile plan and get 3 more months free by going to mintmobile.com/AL.
That's mintmobile.com/AL.
Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/AL.
You know, my mom just had to downsize her living quarters, and I was trying to figure out what to get her for Christmas, and then I was like, here's a no-brainer, a skylight frame.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. She couldn't take all the pictures she had with her before she moved, could she?
No, she couldn't, and the skylight frame couldn't be a better solution because we can preload it up with a lot of pictures that she'll love, and then just keep adding to it via email whenever we want.
Yeah, that's great because she lives several hours from you, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does. And this way she can see her grandson as he gets older because he is changing by the moment right now.
Oh, he definitely is. What is he, 14 and 6'11"?
Yeah, he's 14 and a half and already taller than his mom.
Okay.
Folks, there isn't an easier gift to give. Shopping for family can be tricky, and a lot of times we panic and either send something boring or a gift card because we can't figure out what to do. But with the skylight frame, you know people are going to love it. It's a personal and thoughtful gift. And like I said earlier, you can preload it for a loved one, and then once it's on Wi-Fi, which is a piece of cake to set up, you can email it pictures and they just magically appear within seconds. It really is the perfect gift, and it's super easy to give, and it's the best frame for grandparents, hands down, because it's intuitive and super easy to use. Your grandma, abuelita, mama, nana, pop, granddad, old Ironsides will love it.
Wait. Old Ironsides?
It's comedy, man.
Oh, sorry, didn't recognize that. All right, well, Skylight is a touchscreen photo frame you can send photos to straight from your phone, and they appear in seconds. With over 1 million happy customers, thousands of 5-star reviews, and availability in 30 countries, there's no reason not to get one or give one as a gift. Satisfaction is guaranteed with Skylight, with free 120-day returns.
As a special limited time offer for our listeners, get $15 off your purchase of a skylight frame when you go to skylightframe.com/legends.
To get $15 off your purchase of a skylight frame, just go to skylightframe.com/legends. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/legends.
This is Kate Carlson. Thank you for listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
There's all kinds of speculation about this case because it's so famous. You see these things online. People are speculating with lots of different wild theories. I had read somewhere that another relative had moved in with them and there was some strife at home and that sort of thing. Have you ever heard anything, any kind of details?
There was no relatives moved in. There was relatives visiting because it was a family wedding of some description that was taking place. And there had been a little bit of strife between Mr. Adamski and his wife, simply because she wanted, for some reason, we don't know why, she wanted to move back to Poland. And he was adamant, well, I'm not going. He'd made his life here. And we have a big Polish community in England, many of which did settle here after the war, like my father did, and my father never wanted to go back, and he was the same. But again, it's a married couple. I mean, come on, guys, I'm married. We don't always agree. There's a bit of trouble and strife every now and again. So I don't think it was anything out of the ordinary, but it may be relevant to what may have happened and what, we were told later on.
Did they have children?
I believe they did, but I'm not 100% sure, to be honest.
Right. And so even if they did, they would have gone back to Poland as well.
Maybe, but I know Mrs. Adamski did.
Yeah.
And it seemed rather strange to me that here's Zigmund not wanting to ever go back to Poland, but yet as soon as he's dead, his body is shipped off there for burial, you know? But that's what happened.
Before we turn the page on Godfrey's ensuing experience, which I want to get to here in a minute, I wanted to ask one other question is like, and this is, I guess it's so speculative, I don't know that we can answer this question, but in terms of familial pressure to return to Poland, is this just family members trying to make one of the daughters of the family happy? Or do you think there's a larger pressured reason to get back there? Like, why would you go so far as to torture someone who's married into your family to get them to go back to Poland at this time?
Well, I don't know. I can't answer that question. We don't know anything about the nature of his relatives that came over, how close they were to the family. I'll give you an example of my own father. His father and his brother were killed fighting the Germans on their entrance into Poland. He had another brother who was then murdered by the Germans, and it was only survived by his mother and a younger brother. So he had no close relationship. He corresponded with his mother on and off down the years. But it wasn't until the 1990s, when my father was getting on in years, that we decided to look into his family, because he had a baby brother, and we actually found him and brought him over to England. And my father didn't know if he was even alive. So he had no close family ties. But we can't say that with Mr. Adamski. We have no idea how close him and his wife were with family members back in Poland. It would appear that Mrs. Adamski had closer ties to Poland than he did, because he said, I'm not going, this is my home. Had we not found my uncle after 50 some years from the war, my father would never have gone to Poland again. He went once to meet his brother and fetch him over here. But during the years in the 1980s, when he was corresponding with his mum, he had no desire to go there whatsoever, So how close he was with other family members and what they were up to, we'll have no idea. We'll never find out, I don't think.
What do you think about what Godfrey said about just the look of terror on Adamski's face that he saw when he found him on the coal pile?
I've got to be honest and fair to Alan. I think it's just gibberish, we all look at people, describe people's faces different. This gentleman here, Forrest, he's dying with a cough, but he's got a lovely smile on his face. You're there with your hands on your chin. You look very studious and serious. There's no such thing as frightened to death. It doesn't exist.
Okay.
We do express our emotions visually through our facial expressions, but it's just his interpretation of what he saw,
What do you think about ideas that there was something more going on, some kind of conspiracy, something related to the Eastern Bloc or Russia or something else like that might have led to his untimely death?
He was a coal miner.
Yeah.
He was a common old garden coal miner like my dad. My father left Poland when the Germans invaded, joined the military, so active service throughout the war. And when he finished, he was actually demobilized in Scotland. He had no skills, he had no training. So the only thing he could do was use his brawn, his muscle. Mm-hmm. And he went down the mines, and so did many others, and Mr. Adamski was of the same. They were just ordinary people. You would have passed them in the street and not give them a second look. So to say that this was the KGB or anything else, I think is just bonkers.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd rather believe they was abducted by aliens than the KGB involved, That's my opinion. Right. No, I know the area. My father knew this gentleman very, very well indeed, as did his colleagues at the college. And you have to remember, in those days, when you worked down the mine, it wasn't a job. It wasn't just a job. Everybody stuck together.
Right.
Right. It was totally different. Although I lived at Tingley, I was originally born a few miles away, which is a small village. And you either worked down the mine or the mill, or on the railway. My own father, I've been talking about my stepfather, my father worked on the buses. So to say there's any KGB or anything else involved is just, it's just laughable. Shall I tell you what we were told about Mr. Adamski? And it might explain things.
Sure.
I was part then of the Yorkshire UFO Society. That had been formed by two brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. Graham went on to publish the hugely successful UFO magazine here in the UK and sadly passed away a few years ago. And they had their HQ in Leeds, which was just down the road from where we lived, a few miles away. I joined them as a rookie, didn't know much. So when this took place, I had literally just started to test the ufological waters, so to speak. Now, I can't remember the date. It was a few years after Mr. Adamsky died. And Mark Birdsall used to live in what we call a flat, you call an apartment, in an apartment block. It was on the 7th floor in Leeds, and that was kind of the HQ of our local UFO society. And Mark had a call one evening from a lady who said that she was a relative. I believe she said she was the niece of Mr. Adamsky, and that she had some information that she thought we would be interested in. Because every now and again, the Adamsky thing would appear in a magazine or a newspaper, you know. And she said that what had happened was it was his wife's relatives who'd got hold of Mr. Adamsky and tried to put some pressure on him to actually go back to live in Poland, and that he'd been held in some kind of shed. And I believe there were some marks on his hands as well. And she told us that he tried to get out of this shed, scramble his way up. That's when he got the marks on his hands. And there were some shelving units that had old tins of stuff in it, been there for years and years and years. And of course, he knocked one of these over and it fell down the back of his head and his neck and it burnt him.
Acid.
It was some old material that had been, you know, fermenting there for years and years and years. And he'd taken his shirt off to mop it up. And his captors had given him some ointment to try and cool it. And eventually, in his attempts to try and escape, he did die of a heart attack, you know, or heart failure. I know how that feels because I suffer from heart failure. And of course, the people that were holding him, you know, took him away and dumped him in some obscure place, which was in Todmorden. By the time his body was located, they were gone anyway. They were back in Poland. You know, so this is what she told Mark. I was there when the phone call came in.
Who is this person that's providing this information again?
It was a lady who claimed to be the niece of Zigmund Adamski. She was a niece of the family.
Okay.
And of course, she's not telling us about UFO sightings or anything like that. This is criminal proceedings.
Right.
So Mark's advice to her, I mean, Mark was noting down what she was telling him. And I'm stood there. I didn't know what the call was about. You know, I'm in the flat with him. And he could see a concerned look on his face, but that was about all. He advised her to call the police. If what she was saying is correct, then it's a criminal matter. Now, whether she ever did call the police or not, you know, we never heard from her again. But that's the information that we were given. We can't, you know, validate that this was a family member. But, I mean, we weren't in the telephone book. You know, the Yorkshire UFO Society wasn't in the phone book. You had to search us out in order to find Mark's telephone number in his flat, in his apartment. So she'd obviously done that. And that's what we were told. And, you know, I find that fascinating.
Well, a couple of questions. Do you believe that she was really the niece or related in some way to Adamski, or that she was put up to it, or an agent of some kind?
I've got no reason not to believe it, because she never phoned again. You know, there was never any follow-up. There was any ever offer of evidence or names of the individuals involved or anything like that. It was just one of those phone calls out of the blue that none of us were expecting. And it kind of, for me personally, and I can't prove this, it's just me and my opinions, it kind of makes sense because of the location where Mr. Adamski lived. It's a very busy place. But actually on the road where he lived, because it's a cul-de-sac, you don't get much traffic. And you don't get a lot of people out and about because there is nothing there. There was a local shop and that was it. And there was the restaurant, but the restaurant wasn't open on a morning. It was open on an evening. That's gone now. But so if you wanted to grab somebody, it's quite easy. A few years back, before the pandemic, I filmed a piece there for a TV documentary. And, they got the van at the side of the road with all the equipment, and we're out on the road. And this is when I met the other police officer that was involved in it with Alan. And we hardly saw a soul come walking past,
So, Philip, there are two things, though, that to me, and they're very odd, as much of this case is, that don't seem to line up with maybe an abduction thing. And that one, he was reported to have gotten a fresh haircut or was freshly shaved during the 5 days. And the other thing is about the ointment, and that James Turnbull, the coroner at the time, said the ointment with the residue from the weeping wound, as described by Alan, was sent to toxicology and the scientists there, and they could never, and still have never, determined what that salve was. And then I would imagine, well, if it was, Polish immigrant relatives, it would be something you got from the chemist, something available, not something unknown. What do you think of those two elements?
All I would say is where Mr. Adamski lived, there's no chemist there. I mean, There was the corner shop for your potatoes and that. So there was no chemist there. There wasn't one within walking distance. There is now, not far away, but there wasn't there at the time. And we couldn't identify the substance on the back of his neck. And that's a fact.
You have to wonder, could it have just been aloe vera? Like aloe plant or something?
It could have just been something they had in their pocket and they thought, well, try this. We've got nothing else. What I did do, I asked my father what he thought and what did his colleagues who worked in the colliery, what was their opinion?
Yeah.
And again, it's not proof positive or anything like that, but to a man, they all said it was the wife's relatives had done something to him, simply because she wanted to go home. He was adamant he wasn't going. So it seems suspicious that the first time her relatives are here for a family wedding, he disappears and ends up dead, and off she goes back to Poland. I don't know whether he had an insurance policy. He will have done with the trade union. They were all part of the National Union of Mine Workers. And I know when my father passed away, he had a small benefit from them, nothing huge, but, and she was gone in a flash, and the rest of them gone also. So that was the talk amongst his colleagues who worked down the mine with him, and my father as well.
It's almost a comical story in a way that he's like, the wedding is happening, because that's one of the details you hear about, is how he had written a speech for his goddaughter's wedding. And so that would rule out maybe a suicide or some other thing happening, that he clearly had intended to attend that wedding. And so these folks come into town. His wife is wanting to go back. The relatives strong arm him. They kidnap him, take him to this shed, and they're essentially trying to muscle him into moving with his wife back to Poland, and they're leaving him in there in isolation. And at some point he tries to get out, some acid or some kind of, whatever household chemicals spill on him that burns him. They come back. They actually feel bad about this. They try to help him treat it. And in the course of all of this, he has a heart attack and dies. And then they're like, oh my God, what have we done?
And they give him a haircut.
Yeah, I don't know about the haircut, but I want to come back about that. But they're like, this has gone too far, and now we have this body. We're going to be tried for murder. What are we going to do? They load him into a car or van. They take him to a place where no one's around. He's already died beforehand, which is what Godfrey thought. And they put him up on top of this pile, which that also, to Forrest's point about strange circumstances, it's like, why on top of a 15-foot coal tip?
Yeah.
Why not just on the ground in the coal yard and get the hell out of there? Like, what would be the point of that part of it, I wonder?
Who knows? I mean, people do strange things when they panic. I mean, maybe there was somebody around. I remember the kids, we used to do a thing called arm and a leg. You get hold of your two arms and somebody else would get over the two legs and you'd swing them and let go. And it's surprising, how far you can go when you do that kind of thing.
Right.
But assuming this was the case, the scenario we've just laid out, the perpetrators would know that by the time the police did an investigation, et cetera, they would be gone.
And it's almost like the weirder they make it, the harder it is to sort of figure out what happened.
It doesn't really matter whether they sat him on a bench or dumped him on a coal tip or whatever. By the time it had all, surfaced, they would be back in Poland and nobody could do anything about it. you know. And I have to remember his wife reported him missing. His car was still there. So he hadn't had some kind of mental attack and got in his car and drove off somewhere because his vehicle was still there. But like I said, it's in easy access of the main motorway route all around the UK where he lives. And, you know, and like I say, I used to go to Todmorden, but I didn't go on the motorway. I go a different route. And it's not a simple place to find if you don't know where you're going, you know. So it's that bothers me, is why would they dump him in Todmorden? There's plenty of places locally. I mean, where we live at Tingley, there used to be a lot of farming in the area and whatever. And we have what's called the rhubarb triangle. So it's not the Bermuda Triangle. It's it's the rhubarb. And in these areas, they were known for growing rhubarb. But what they do, they'd force grow it. So they'd have these long huts, and they would literally grow rhubarb in the dark with a candle. You know, they'd force grow it. And of course, a lot of that industry are gone, but we call them rhubarb sheds. So they were like a normal shed, but were stretched incredibly long. These were dotted all over the place. And as a kid, we used to roam over the fields and play in them. You know, they're totally empty. So there's plenty of places nearby to dump somebody. If you didn't know the location, you'd soon find one, you know. So why Todmorden? I don't know.
You know, because they never found his wallet, right? Maybe their idea was that it would buy him the time they needed to flee the country, as we would take him to a town where he is unlikely to be recognized on sight.
Yeah.
Remove his ID, and that gives us a little more time to get out of the country.
By the time this all surfaced, they were long gone. And then, of course, like I said, it being an Eastern Bloc country, even if there had been a police inquiry, they would never have been able to extradite them anyway. You know, it's as simple as that. So in that respect, if this is true, it's almost like the perfect crime, you know?
Yeah.
The coroner says he died of natural causes, and the potential perpetrators are gone and never to be seen again.
The way that the body was found has not necessarily a lot of details that match up, but it reminded me quite a bit of the Great Mole Error mystery with Peter Gibbs, where he was found in a weird place, in that it was passed by there on Mole by farmers who didn't see him until even a search conducted didn't turn up the body. Just found in a very strange manner, not fitting with how somebody who may have fallen out of an airplane fell on top of the hills there in an awkward place. And with Adamsky, it's just the explanation here, it kind of lines up, but there's some nagging facts about it. Like one, again, that matches other cases where you hear about clothes put back on hastily by, as Alan said, looked like somebody who didn't really know what they were doing. They were not putting his shoes back on correctly. The socks were not correctly. And I've heard that, again, with Betty and Barney Hill. Terry Lovelace also reported something where his socks were put on sideways, where any human, even if you're quickly fitting somebody back with their clothes, was on wrong. And the boots were a mess. So again, not to draw conclusions where there aren't any. It's just like there's some odd enough things there that I can see why people would make a UFO abduction connection.
I think the only two reasons that the UFO part comes in is, one, the gentleman's surname, Adamsky. Adamsky is connected with ufology, the Space Brothers and these photographs, largely dismissed now as a hoax. But nonetheless, he was part of UFO folklore. Every student of the subject should know the name Adamsky. I said to my father, is Adamsky a rare name in Poland? Or, he just didn't know. I said, is it a common name? But he'd no idea. I mean, my father left Poland when he was 18 to fight in the war. So, he didn't know that much about it. So there's one Adamsky. His name automatically puts him in the UFO ideas. And then 6 months later, of course, he's Alan Godfrey, had his own encounter, Godfrey being the first police officer on site when his body had been found. And that's the only reasons I can see that that people have made a connection with UFOs when, in my humble opinion, this really isn't one. Yes, a strange and suspicious death with not all the answers are there. I've no doubt about that. I mean, we had a mass murderer reigned terror on this part of the world for a number of years, called Peter Sutcliffe, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, and some of the ways he displayed his victims left the police scratching their head. They were very peculiar, but nonetheless he did. So I only think if he was called something else, if he had a different surname, we would probably have seen it in the newspaper as a suspicious death, and that would have been the end of it,
This is where I would like to point something out to our listeners and to people who I think have a broader perception of ufology and UAP investigations. You're a prominent researcher. You've been in this field for decades. As we said in our introduction of you, you have a lot of accolades, awards. You've published a lot of books about this. You've done a lot of research. And I think that sometimes there's a perception among folks who aren't as steeped in it that someone like you would come into this and be part of the reason this case is so conflated with an alien abduction. And here you are sitting on our show saying, yeah, I think it's just a weird murder. I think it's, X, Y, and Z. Even if the familial pressure story isn't the story, it probably was some other weird thing, and it doesn't have anything to do with aliens. And that's what you are saying about Zigmund Adamski right now.
Absolutely. I think it is a suspicious death, but inflicted maybe by accident, but with humans behind it, and I'll leave it at that.
And you are saying this as a person who clearly is open to the idea of alien abduction and UFOs and UAP phenomena.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, so that's something I want to get out there. I think that that's an interesting take, and I think that I really appreciate your telling us what you told us. This is information that we hadn't gotten anywhere else, and I think it sheds new light on this particular story, which is fascinating. And I also think it does Alan Godfrey a service because, having read his book, which I greatly enjoyed, I found him to be a very funny writer, somebody that I would like to spend time with. And it's my understanding that he's kind of pulling back from all this stuff at this time and maybe has some things going on. But in a different time and place, after reading his book, I felt like he would be someone that would actually be really fun to have a pint with. So coming down to his experience, though, what I did take away from the book and what I liked about his book in particular, which is Who or What Were They? On the cover, he's got a picture of a gray alien and a police car. And you think when you're getting a look at the cover, never judge a book by its cover, that you're going to go, oh, this is going to be this big alien story. But his personal take on this is the same as yours, in my opinion. It's like, I never said this case had anything to do with UFOs. However, later something happened that wound up getting those two things merged together in this way, and it just caught like wildfire and went around the world. And that's this connection that somehow aliens were linked to Adamski's death, and he was the investigating officer. And there's this perception that all happened on the same day or within a couple of days, but that's not really the case. So now what I would ask you to do is talk to us a little bit about what happened to Constable Godfrey a few months later.
Yeah, so we're 6 months further down the line, when in November of 1980, Alan was a police constable in Todmorden, part of the West Yorkshire Police Force, and he drove what we used to call in those days a panda car, but a police car. He was on night duty on his own, so he was alone in the police car. He'd actually been looking that night for some cows that had gone missing, and he'd been around local places looking for these cows. I think it was somewhere, gone 5 o'clock in the morning. He went down into the town centre of Todmorden. He actually saw a police officer on foot patrol. I think he stopped and had a chat with him. And he thought, well, it's getting near to my time, the end of my shift. I'll have one last look for these cows. And that's me finished for the night. So he set off up the main road through Todmorden. And when I say the main road, gentlemen, it's not like you have in America. It's it's a little road. And, he flicked the indicator on in his car to turn into the road that led to the police station, when he spotted up above, in front of him in the road, this light. So he didn't turn off. He kept going. And he wondered what it was at first. Bear in mind there was a large mill by that location with people working in it and so on. And he thought it might be something related to that. But as he got closer, he realized it wasn't just a light. There was this object blocking the road in front of him. It was just above the ground, so it wasn't on the tarmac of the road. It was just above it. It was shaped like one of the old-fashioned children's spinning tops. It was dark in colour. Alan described the top part of it having a row of panels or windows, and the bottom half was rotating. And you could even see the debris underneath it on the road swirling around. So he stopped the patrol car. He got on the radio to go back to the police station and couldn't get through. In fairness to Alan, he said that's not unusual in the town because it's surrounded by hills and things like that. He had a clipboard with some paper on it. He got hold of that, started to draw this thing that's in front of him. Bear in mind, the patrol car is stationary. The next thing he remember, he's several hundred yards down the road, beyond where he'd initially been, now driving the patrol car. No recollection of putting it into gear, stick shift, as you guys call it in America. So he turned around, went back to the location. Now, it had been raining during the night, so the road was wet. But where this object had been, the tarmac was dry. So Alan got back to the police station. He noticed that his police boot was split and there was some kind of mark on the instep of his foot, which wasn't there the night before. He reported the incident, and when he went back on shift, he was asked to write a full report, which he did. And that was Alan's sighting. And when you speak to Alan about it, he said, as you know, our police officers don't carry firearms. Alan said if I'd have had a brick or a stone, I could have thrown it at that thing. It was that close and it would have gone clunk, So eventually, Alan linked up with local UFO investigators. Jenny Randalls was one, Harry Harris was another, and they obtained the services of 2 professional psychiatrists to put Alan under regressive hypnosis. I think they did this 3 times. On each occasion, they left him with I don't know how they do it, but he couldn't remember what he'd revealed under hypnosis. And they were filmed. In the end, they decided to show Alan the recording of the video film they made of it. It's not in the greatest of condition. And bear in mind that we're going back to 1981 now. It was video cameras weren't that common. But nonetheless, you see Alan lying down. And at first, he sees this light up ahead and he says, he thinks it might be a bus, bringing workers to the mill. And he says, it's not a bus. And his voice changes. He's got that curious sound in his voice, and you can see the expression on his face. And all of a sudden, Alan throws his arms up across his face like that, and he literally shouts out, it's a light, it's a light, it's a light. And he goes on to describe seeing 2 types of beings. One was a human-like guy with a long robe and a beard and a small cap like the people of the Jewish faith wear. I forget what they're called. And this being was called Joseph. Not Joseph, Joseph. Then Alan kind of screwed his face up at one point and went, ugh. He sees these other creatures that had their heads were shaped like the old-fashioned light bulbs. And he says, they want me to get on the table. I'm not getting on the table. And I say, what are you doing now, Alan? I'm getting on the table. So he gets on the table. If that's not strange enough, Alan then sees a black dog. And so I'm one of the few people who've seen the hypnosis video. I transcribe it all in my book without consent. And when you ask Alan about the hypnosis, he said, look, Philip, that thing was on the road and I saw it, I drew it. It's not I said, that for the hypnosis, I don't know. You decide for yourself. So again, Alan's not putting the rubber stamp on the hypnosis and saying this proves this, that, and the other. But it is fascinating. And of course, if we talk about the black dog, well, the black dog is well known in folklore here in the UK. I don't know about the US, but certainly here in the UK. It's also a terminology for depression. I'll give you an example. Our late wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill suffered from depression, but he called it the black dog. Up in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, Mark Bursell and I went to investigate a sighting there. A chap had written to us, we phoned him, we said, we'll come and visit you. Now, when we got there, the village, if that's what you want to call it, was just half a dozen houses. They didn't even have a number on the doors. So we knocked on the first door and said, "Can you tell us where Mr. So-and-so lived?" And this lady said, "Oh, have you come about the ghost dog?" And of course, it was the black dog that ran down the village with the big glowing eyes. So that's just one example of, the black dog in folklore. But here you have Alan Godfrey in Todmorden under hypnosis describing a black dog. There's a black dog on there. It's one of those bits of the hypnosis is kind of, missed out by people, but it's a fascinating thing. It really is. And that is Alan's case in general. Alan asked for permission from his chief constable, that's the top man, the boss, to speak about this in public and go on television in uniform. And he was given the all clear, yes, indeed, and that's what he did.
So, Scott.
Yes, Forrest?
How can our listeners find out more information about each episode, like research links, pictures, maps, video, and audio clips, if any, and play the episode right from the page with a link to the written transcript below?
Why, they just need to go to astonishinglegends.com.
And what if people want to check out Tess's super fascinating and comprehensive blog articles, purchase one of the books mentioned in the show, or submit a segue?
Once again, go to astonishinglegends.com.
And most importantly, how can folks get links, product info, and promo codes for discounts on all of our wonderful sponsor offers like this one they hear on the show, and purchase our AL-themed merch from our store, all of which I might humbly add make for terrific holiday presents for you or someone you love?
astonishinglegends.com.
Exactly. You see what we're trying to say here, our beloved listeners? Everything we've ever done, everything we're about, and everything we want to offer the world or have the world know about us can be found in one place, our Squarespace website.
astonishinglegends.com.
Indeed. If anyone ever asks me about the podcast, I'm not sending them to 3 different social media apps, a webpage with 12 links, or trying to get them to remember an SM handle that's got 6 extra letters at the end of my name and a number of undistinguishable underscores. You know, as a consumer, you have to make it as easy as possible if you want people to check you out. And in our experience, the easiest and best way for both you as a creator or customer is with a Squarespace website.
Exactly. What everyone wants, what you need is flexibility with your site. Whatever your use case or category is, it's so easy to start with a Squarespace professional website template. And they have designs for whatever you're doing. Then you customize your look, update your content, and add the features you want for your unique needs. It makes you and your content, your business, your brand stand out on every device.
Yeah, like take custom merch, for example. Everyone needs merch, but you might have thought you're not big enough for that yet, or maybe you have ideas for terrific, funny t-shirts, but you don't know how to sell them. Well, you can with Squarespace. You can design your own products, and then production, inventory, and shipping are handled for you. This saves you a ton of time and money, and then you can sit back and enjoy a passive income stream that engages your audience and scales your brand. And that's Fat Stack Synergy, baby.
Squarespace is all about functionality, ease, and efficiency. You can connect your store to vetted third-party tools with Squarespace extensions. For example, say you have goods or services you sell on site, like maybe at a farmer's or flea market, or maybe at a booth at a convention. Well, Squarespace makes selling in person with point of sale a snap. You just connect a Square Reader to the SQSP app, and it keeps your orders, inventory, and customer data in sync with your online store.
Look, a new year is coming up, and it's time to stop dilly-dallying around waiting for that perfect moment you think you'll be ready. Because guess what? That moment ain't coming. You just got to take your shot and launch that dream, and that dream starts with a Squarespace website.
Well, you know what? That is good advice just across the board for us. Take it from us. Head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/legends using code LEGENDS to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Do you have any of those relatives that it's kind of hard to shop for?
Boy, howdy. Wait, nobody says that anymore. Yes, I do.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good.
There are a few that we usually can't figure out, but not this year. This year, all our problems were solved by Uncommon Goods. It took the stress out of our holiday shopping because they have excellent and, more importantly, truly unique gifts for everyone on your list. Moms, dads, teenagers, in-laws, BFFs. Uncommon Goods has an almost mystical collection of the perfect gifts for all of them.
Yeah, did you find some miracle gift ideas there?
I did, actually. Have you ever
Yeah.
seen those super cool little, like, tiny displays that look like an old European street with little buildings and stores, but they're built inside what was already a book so they can live on the bookshelf with your other books?
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. I love those. But aren't they a ton of work to make?
Well, yeah, if you're doing it from scratch, but Uncommon Goods had these ones called the Storybook DIY Kit. The one we got was less than $40, and frankly, it's one of those gifts that's so cool, I'm kind of wanting one for myself.
Yeah.
Folks, from art and jewelry to kitchen, home, and bar, Uncommon Goods has something for everyone. And now they offer Uncommon Experiences, which are more than virtual classes. They're unexpected opportunities to have fun and connect in new ways, from tarot card reading, romantic map making, cooking, and mixology classes, and more.
Well, first off, that's a really good price for those book nooks. And yeah, I
Yeah.
dig the holiday cocktails one. Look out, Rich Adam. I'm going to give you a run for your money. When you shop at Uncommon Goods, you're supporting artists and small independent businesses. These fine products are often made in small batches, so shop now before they sell out this holiday season.
And with every purchase you make at Uncommon Goods, they give back $1 to a nonprofit partner of your choice. They've donated more than $2.5 million to date. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/astonishing.
That's uncommongoods.com/astonishing for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer.
Uncommon Goods. We're all out of the ordinary.
Hello everyone, I'm Tristan Carlson, and this is Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
Some of us here have heard of the Black Shuck, with a paranormal themed appearance and event, I think early 16th century perhaps, but well noted by some here. So yeah, it's not quite as popular or a cultural or mythological touchstone here, I think, but we have heard, I think, with the case of David Huggins, where he claims, along with this motley crew, this menagerie of creatures that came to visit him, one was a tiny, hairy little man, like a miniature Sasquatch. So we've heard of all kinds of creatures, but the black dog, it seems more symbolic to me when I read that.
Absolutely. And like I said, there are parallels in folklore and history. And, the area itself has had its own UFO sightings in and around. Todmorden is surrounded by hills and moors. It floods every now and again because the water just washes down from the hills. And but it was unlikely. It was, it's not the kind of thing you expect. It was really a bolt from the blue. And in fairness to Alan, he doesn't rubber stamp the hypnosis. He just said, yeah, that's what came out under hypnosis. I don't know. I can't remember that.
Do you know of any other cases in UFO lore where people have seen a dog on a craft in an abduction experience?
Well, I think Alan's attitude about this and his demeanor, his position, being, it's a very, very subjective experience, as I'm sure you know, and also he's trying to be very objective about it. I think that adds a lot of credibility, at least for us. And we found it refreshing where he was, this happened, make of it what you will. It's up to your interpretation, at least with the hypnosis. However, I will swear that I did see something. I did see a UFO in the middle of the road. Yeah, no one could tell me different on that.
Yeah, and I think it reflects Alan's character as well. Alan had commendations as a police officer. He was a very down-to-earth, almost like an old-fashioned kind of police officer. He would, if you were found with a minor misdemeanor, he's probably the type of policeman who would give you a good telling off, a warning, don't do it again. Not the kind of guy to issue a penalty or a fine or arrest you, unless he really had to. I don't think it was the kind of police officer you want to argue with either. And that's the kind of, there were a lot, he wasn't on his own like that. There was a number of officers like that in those days, and Alan was one of them. But like I said, he was well respected, had commendations, he enjoyed his work, he was a good police officer, and it was a great shame that what followed. But I think the way Alan has responded to things is a reflection of his character. Although we have skeptics in this country. They don't know any of them that they're saying that Alan is lying or he made it up or he's fantasizing. Something they may have an explanation for it, but it's none of those. And, I have no reason to disbelieve him whatsoever.
What is your personal opinion, specifically as a UFO UAP researcher? What's your personal opinion on hypnotic regression?
That's a tough question, and it's one we've been dealing with recently as well. When I was at Beaufort, we weren't allowed to use regression. It was barred. But the way I look upon it is that it's down to the individual, the abductee, whatever you want to call them. And it's for them to make the call whether they want to use it or not. And then when they've had it, when they've undergone hypnosis, whether they believe themselves if it was of any use to them or not. And I'll give you an example. I sat in on, this is in the 1990s, I sat in on 2 hypnosis sessions. And the guy doing the hypnosis was a clinical psychologist. He'd been hired to do it. And there were 2 different gentlemen. And it was somebody else doing it, not me. I didn't ask any questions and nothing. I was to sit there and keep my mouth shut. And the first chap, he was really up for it. He was very excited. He told us the story and this period of missing time. And you were sure as eggs that as soon as he went under hypnosis, this abduction story was going to manifest. Not a thing. Absolutely nothing. He just recounted what he'd already told us. There was a second guy, a couple of weeks later, same psychologist. He was the opposite. He was very quiet, very calm, very steadfast. And you thought, not going to get anywhere here. But the entirely opposite happened. When he went under hypnosis, he recounted this typical alien abduction scenario. So that kind of surprised me on both events. Now, I'm just preparing a book for next year. And I've asked this question about hypnosis to 2 abductees in the US and 1 here in the UK. They all underwent hypnosis. And I said, well, what do you think? Was it of any use to you? One was the late Calvin Parker, Pascagoula case. Calvin said, not really. I could remember it all anyway, And the other 2 said, well, no, not really, Philip. Not really. It might have sharpened a few details, but that was it. So it's down to the individual, the experience of the abductee. And I think what certainly happened in the 1980s and in the 1990s, as people like Bud Hopkins became well known and what have you, in cases like this, they would look at hypnosis as the first option. Whereas me, I think it should be the last option. You garner all the information first, and then and only then at the end of the day, if it's something the experiencer wants to undergo, then it's up to them. It's not for you to say, I think you should do this or I think you should do that. What is interesting is when you look en masse, I'm not talking individual cases here. When you look at the information en masse, it's not that different. So you have cases where people can remember everything consciously, right? They'll tell you this, that, and the other. When you compare that to hypnotic testimony of other cases, they don't differ that much. So is that an argument that hypnosis doesn't necessarily tap into your fantasies, your subconscious, and you make things up? But I'll leave it there. I'll leave it down to the individuals to decide for themselves. And the book I'm actually doing next year is all about hypnosis in abduction cases.
Okay.
So there's the story of what they told us, then there's the transcripts of the hypnosis, and you were allowed to make your own conclusions at the end of it, But there are others who would argue differently. For example, I spoke to Kathleen Marden. She's well known in this field. She's absolutely adamant that if used correctly, forensically, she might say, that you can garner details from people's subconscious mind under hypnosis. And she has a very powerful argument to support that. I'm not saying she's right. I'm not saying she's wrong. But that's her conclusions, if you like.
That's fascinating. I can't wait to read your new book about that. So let me ask this then. Is this something that we've talked about on the show before? And I'm not sure if this is just related to specific cases that we've encountered over the years as we've interviewed some folks who've had abduction experiences and that sort of thing. Are you familiar with the idea of screen memories? Or does it
Yes.
okay, so
Yes.
I figured you would be. So my question is, do you think that there's a possibility, if you're going to go ahead and say, well, abductions are real, these things are happening, grays are real, all of these kinds of things are really happening. What do you think of these ideas that since you were already being manipulated, because even though, coming back to what Forrest said a minute ago, and a very important point about Alan Godfrey's experience, yes, he said to himself, as you said, he did not rubber stamp the hypnosis. He was like, hey, look, after this thing happened to me, I read about Betty and Barney Hill. I looked into things. So I started to put this stuff into my brain. So maybe that's where it came from. But the other thing that he did, he did maintain, he was like, I don't care what you say. I saw this craft. It was in the middle of the road. I saw it and I drew it. What another thing that I loved about his sketches, he drew it while he was looking at it, not after the fact when somebody asked him, what does he remember? That's really amazing. But the other thing is the missing time. That was a real experience for him. He suddenly was driving on the other side of it. Under hypnosis, he describes the bright light, which is, was that part of that transition to the missing time. So then, because it doesn't seem to be too hard to manipulate mankind from a mental standpoint in these abduction cases, what do you think of the idea that the grays and everything that people are even recalling, whether under hypnosis or not, is really just a screen memory covering up some completely different, entirely different experience?
Well, I think there are screen memories in a whole variety of psychological departments, if you like. People who are traumatized by a whole range of things can't necessarily deal with it subconsciously, and they will have a screen memory that helps them cope with it. And they haven't dreamt up this screen memory. It's just something that's actually in us, and that can be trauma from, an assault, an accident, or warfare, or whatever. So screen memories are a known thing in psychology. And what amazes me about regressive hypnosis is that some of the experiences will say, the aliens blocked my memory, so I couldn't remember this. So I went under hypnosis and I remembered it. Well, you think, well, it's about time now the aliens realize it, then it's a waste of time blocking anything, isn't it? Because all they've got to do is stick you under hypnosis and you can remember it. I'm sure if they are aliens, they're smart enough to know that by now. I don't think many people would admit to that, and realize that. But it is, it's a fact, But I think in trauma, and again, not all abductees are traumatized by these events. I've interviewed a number of them who thought it was a very positive experience. For example, we'll go back to Pascagoula. Calvin Parker was traumatized, but his colleague who was with him that night, Charles Hickson, he thought it was great. He thought he was something special. They'd chosen him for he became like a contactee. Something was going to happen on Earth and he was going to be part of it. He wasn't traumatized, whereas Calvin, was traumatized for the rest of his life. So you have two gentlemen with two different sets of life experiences involved in the same phenomena, but react in different ways. But I really do think there are screen memories, but they're usually when we're traumatized, in a whole variety of ways. But I'm not sure it's there to mask anything sinister from the aliens, because if it is, well, it ain't working, is it?
I'd heard a figure, at least in the 1990s, that the Todmorden area accounted for maybe almost 10% of all sightings in the UK, or at least in Great Britain. And there was a quote from Jenny Randalls, we mentioned, that in that area, there's a lot of reservoirs, a lot of water, as you said, rain keeps flooding down, but also the land is filled with a lot of quartz. Do you think that makes any difference in terms of the number of sightings?
Well, it depends on what your theories are on what lies behind the phenomenon. In that era that Jenny's talking about, one of the theories put forward, it wasn't an old theory, but it became more popular, and it was termed earth lights. So we know that the Earth during some earthquakes produce like a luminous glow. So earth lights are like a cousin of earthquake lights, but they're very localized. And they may be caused by where the land is under pressure, either from fault lines or bodies of water, putting pressure on the strata beneath it and so on. And they give off these luminosities.
I think this was just captured, like the past couple of months. I think this was just captured related to an earthquake
there
somewhere.
there was evidence finally of
they had it on
what
video.
were called earthquake lights.
Yeah. So
I mean, there's also the green flash over the horizon here.
Yeah, so the theory goes on to say that these lights are electromagnetically charged, and that if you get too close to them, they can literally fry your brain, and you would have an experience. Not everybody, it's only certain people it affects. I'll give you an example. Just a month after Alan Godfrey's encounter, we have probably what's Britain's most famous encounter in Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk. And they saw these strange lights from the American air bases of Woodbridge and Bentwaters, and the forest lies between the two installations. There's all these lights come down in the forest. They dispatched 3 security men, Air Force security. One stayed with the vehicle. The other 2 went into the forest. It was Jim Penniston and John Burroughs. Jim Penniston will tell you that he saw this triangular-shaped object, a bit like a big car, either just off the ground or on legs. It had red lights on top, blue lights underneath. It was smooth to touch. It had markings down the side, and he walked around it for about 45 minutes. His colleague, John Burroughs, who's just a few yards away from him, said, I never saw that. All I saw was strange lights. Now, is this an example of that Earth-light theory? There are lights there that are known, and they give off this electromagnetic force, and it affects one guy, Jim Penniston, and he sees this. It's a very real experience, this triangular-shaped object. However, his colleague is not affected by it, and all he says is these strange lights. I'm not saying that is the case. I believe both gentlemen are honest and telling the truth, but it's an example. So the Earth lights theory was very popular in the 80s and early 90s here in the UK, promoted by Jenny and others. A chap called Paul Devereaux was another one, wrote 2 fascinating books on it. And of course, the hillsides over Todmorden and beyond into the Yorkshire Dales, where we had a lot of sightings, are full of fault lines, bodies of water. It's unusual how these little remote places had more sightings than they did in urban areas and in the towns and cities, but they did. And that's a fact. And then, you can theorize all you want. They just did. So that was one of the ideas put forward to try and explain these things. And of course, you then go back to Alan Godfrey. The first thing Alan talks about seeing up the end of the road is a light. And of course, he throws his arms up across him under the hypnosis videos, the light, and he shouts, the light, the light, the light, or words to that effect. So people who believe in that theory will say, well, this is Alan encountering one of these earth lights, and it affected him, and then it affected what he saw, but it was very real to him. I had another colleague called Albert Budden from London. Albert was a science teacher, and he expanded the earth lights theory a bit further to saying that the earth itself gives off these magnetic impulses, and also man-made structures now, like the telephone masts and things like that. And he said that the reason some people are affected by it is because, they just are, and others aren't. It's like you and I can take the same medication for something. You will have the side effects that's listed on the piece of paper, and I don't. And it's the same when you come into contact with these forces. Some are affected by it and others are not. And, I knew Albert very well. Albert wrote a couple of books on this, and he, as far as he was concerned, he'd solved the subject, and that was him done. We've never seen him again, But it's just a popular theory that has tended to fall away, certainly in the 2000s, but was very popular in the 80s and 90s. And it could explain some things if it's correct, but it's still a theory. For example, in the parts of the Yorkshire Dales National Park in the 1980s, which is not that far from Todmorden, but it's stretching it a little bit. We had a lot of sightings, mainly of strange lights. And again, the area is littered with fault lines and so on. However, across the sea in Norway, at a small place called Hessdalen in central Norway, they too had these strange lights. Now, I've been there. Island is surrounded by 3 mountains, the names of which I'll never be able to pronounce in 1,000 years, you know. And there was literally only 200 people lived there.
Yeah.
But they were seeing these lights down in the valley. UFO Norway, UFO Sweden set up Project Hestal, and they literally camped out there. And they managed to photograph it. They've filmed it since. It's the last field trip that Dr. Hynek did before he passed away. And right next to me, you can't see it, but I have Dr. Hynek's wolfskin hat that he wore in Hestalen, and he signed it. I've got his signature on the front
amazing.
of it. But so it was these strange lights. There's now a field station that monitors it 24/7, and they have captured it on video as well. So you see this strange luminosity flying across the valley. Now, again, they might argue, because not, you know, the locals, some would just say, I saw these lights. Some will get a bit closer. Well, it's not lights. It turns out to be something else, but not all of them, just some of them. So whether that's a theory that's worth pursuing, I'll leave your listeners to think about.
Well, we have those here in North Carolina. Perhaps you've heard of them, the Brown Mountain Lights, which...
Yes, you have the Brown Mountain Lights. You have the Min Lights in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Marfa Lights in Texas.
Texas is right.
There's other areas. For example, we live in just north of the Pennine chain of hills.
Yes.
It runs down Britain. If we go a bit further south into the counties further down, if you go into Derbyshire and the Peak District, as you go down this particular road, again, it's a small country road, it's a big rock outcrop that hits you in the face. And it's called Shining Clough, because every now and again it gives off these strange lights. It's not a reflection, you know, it's the rock itself. Out on the moors in the Peak District, the people were called out, the local volunteers, mountain volunteers were called out because people had seen these strange lights going across the moors, and they thought it was walkers that had got lost. And of course, there's nobody there, you know? So again, these lights, we can go back, we can call them fairy lights. They are intertwined in the folklore, certainly of this country, and others as well, I dare say, like the Min lights from Australia. So there's different countries around the world will have their own version of these. Now, whether they, you know, do the things that people claim they may be able to do and is a different matter. But it's an interesting look at the subject, if nothing else.
Hello everybody, I'm David Mars, producer of the Hot Wampa Science Fiction podcast, and when I'm not working on my own show, I'm listening to Astonishing Legends with Scott and Forrest. Let's get back to the show.
All right, so there's a detail associated with Godfrey and also the night that Alan saw the craft. One thing in particular was when you talked about cows that were missing, there was actually more to that. There was a woman that he visited, and he talks about this in his book. I think she was around 80 years old. She had called, and there had been multiple calls that night about people saying that there was this small herd of cows in their yard running around their house or near their property where there should not be any cows. You know, it sounds like a funny episode of All Creatures Great and Small or something from that book, because just like, okay, we're running around looking for these cows. And so he goes out and he meets with this older woman. He goes in the house and she's like, well, they were all right out here in the yard. I saw cows out there. And he says, okay, well, we should need to figure out where they came from. And he said, well, where did they go? And she goes, well, I don't know. She goes, there was a bright light, a very bright light, and they disappeared, or I didn't see them anymore. And it was before you got here. And so he was like, okay, that's strange, you know, in his mind, and what he wrote in his book was that there, you know, maybe there was a car coming down the road in front of her property, but he was quite convinced. And he said this very clearly. He was like, yes, she was older, but she seemed very much to have her wits about her, not senile, nothing. It was like, he believed her. That's prior to his personal encounter, which I don't think he describes in the waking state or in his encounter the light. I think he only describes that in the hypnosis. And by the way, I saw just a clip of that. The footage that you describe is, I think it was on either on Strange But True, or it was on Grenada Up Front.
Probably both of them.
Yeah. And where he leans back and he puts his arms up. It's unbelievable. It seems so real. The experience that he's having, the panic you feel for him in that moment. like after he found himself on the other side driving and he turned back around, he picks up another officer on foot patrol, I believe.
Yep.
They come back. That officer personally witnesses the dry ground on the street and the swirled leaves and branches and explains that, I can see the evidence of something strange has happened here, although the craft was gone. But then they go over to Centervale Park, I believe, and it's locked up. They have to jump a fence or something. And lo and behold, on the rugby pitch, cows.
Yep, there the cows were found in a park with the gates locked. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, this is straight out of Skinwalker Ranch with the cows getting moved all around. It's like, so that's one of the craziest things, because this is not a hypnosis detail. This is a real world detail with witnesses. So whatever's going on that night, there seems to be a small group of cows being teleported all over town.
I wouldn't go that far. What I would say is that there's these other stories that night. Whether they're connected to what Alan saw or not is a different matter. I think it's a huge leap of faith. All we can say is this is what was reported that night. This is what Alan later found. The cows were in this park. And that's it. Again, you draw your own conclusions from it. It is peculiar, but peculiar things do happen. I mean, they're not necessarily related. But it is a curious thing, yes. And, whether it's connected or not, I wouldn't like to say. I really wouldn't. But yeah, the cows were found in a park with the gates locked. But I don't know if there was another entrance, whether, did the cows trample over some bushes to get in? Who knows?
Yeah, he said in the book, he said they would have had to gone up a steep flight of stairs or something like that to get in there, he thought.
Well, I don't know. But I don't think he will have spent too much trying to figure it out. He found the cows and that's game over for the night. That's what he was doing. But yes, he did, because he'd spoken to the officer on foot patrol prior to his sighting. So he was down in the town centre. So he knew there was a colleague there. Right. What is even more interesting is that Alan was asked to write a report, which he did, and he submitted it. And like all police stations, that report would have been sent to the Ministry of Defence in the UK. But when the MOD released slowly but surely their UFO files down the years, that was released to the Public Records Office, there is no sign of Alan Godfrey's encounter, no sign of his report whatsoever. Now, it could be a clerical error that it's stuck in a file under a different heading in some other filing cabinet, because it was all paper then. There was no digital formats. It was all in writing. Could have got lost. Who knows? But again, it's not there. That's all we can say. It is not there. And I know the gentleman who was responsible or worked with the National Archives to release all the MOD files. It's Dr. David Clark in Sheffield. I asked him at the time, if Alan Godfrey's encounter crops up in any of these files that are being released, I'd love to see the paperwork of that. But it's not there. It's not to be found anywhere.
And you guys have an equivalency to the Freedom of Information Act there, right?
We do. We have it. But whether it's of any use or not, it's a different matter, I've tried it several times and got nowhere. Okay. But it's there. Right. But you can't find anything official. Alan did write the report. There is no problem with that, but we can't find it anywhere.
The last chapter in Alan's book was written by Jenny, who is, again, a prominent UFO researcher over there, right? And Jenny talks about a lot of interesting things, but one of the things that came forward maybe after the book was written and at the late date was another witness the night of Alan's encounter, a bus driver. Do you know about this?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few reports from around that time. What originally was thought as well, there was 3 other police officers out on the moors at night. They were actually looking for stolen motorcycles. Apparently, they would steal them, drive them around the moors, and then dump them,
Right.
And it was 2 men and one female officer. And they saw this, no joking here, they saw this blue light in the sky, not down in the streets. And I met one of these officers. I interviewed him. And initially, we thought it was the same night as Alan's, but it turned out it was a few nights later, I believe. But there were other reports of some lights that night. And as it was when the story eventually got out in the newspapers that then other people stepped forward. So there were other instances, yes.
Jenny mentioned in this last chapter a gentleman named Bob Coates, who was a bus driver, and he was coming into town. This is something that I read yesterday, which I thought was fascinating, by the way. Todmorden, I'm determined to try and say it right. Todmorden. Is that
it's close.
Okay, it was the second area in the British Isles to have bus service, like one of the earliest ones to have a bus service, which I thought was interesting. Going way back before this. But anyway, this gentleman, Bob Coates, was a bus driver, and he later came forward after he figured out all the dates, I guess, and heard about it, that he was coming back that night on that road, and he came across the spot. And Alan was already gone, either had gone to get the other officer or was maybe examining the park or something. But it was strange enough to this driver that he stopped and got out and he examined the ground. He saw that it was dry. He saw the swirled branches. But the other thing he said was that he could feel an updraft, some kind of strange updraft, which he didn't necessarily describe as wind, but like a force pushing up. But it stopped at a certain height, like, I don't know what the height was. I don't know if he even said specifically, but you got the impression it was 4 or 5 feet, which was about the height that Alan thought the craft was at. You couldn't feel that anymore. So it was almost like an atmospheric residue that stood out in his mind. And some other point in his book, there was the point that Alan, because folks were like, oh, what this thing he drew, it looks like a bus. It was a bus. And so then people were like, oh, well, it was Bob Coates' bus. He had stopped to check this out anyway. But then Bob was like, no, I didn't park sideways across the road. Also, Alan used to drive a bus. He knows what a bus looks like. It was one of the many jobs that he had.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff, I just thought that was interesting in terms of corroboration of multiple points of input on that in terms of witnesses.
Well, the way they get the bus idea from is under the hypnosis. Alan at first says it's a bus.
Right.
And then he says, it's not a bus. And his demeanor under hypnosis then changes because it will make sense to him. It's something in the distance. Oh, it must be a bus. Hang on a minute. That's not a flaming bus.
Yeah.
But this is under hypnosis. So that's where the skeptical arguments came in, that Alan sees a bus, perhaps dropping people off at the mill, coming to work that morning. And for some reason has this psychological episode that turns from a bus to a flying saucer and aliens. But remember, the patrol car was stationary and they're on the main road through the town, so the bus would have come straight past Alan. I don't know of anybody who reported a stationary police car with the police officers sat in it, staring into space, as if he's under some kind of spell.
Right.
Because that's what they're wanting you to believe. And I can understand from a skeptical point of view why they would come to that conclusion, but to me, it doesn't add up. It does not add up at all, But yeah, the bus driver did say exactly what you've said there. But then if you go back to Albert Budden and his ideas of natural forces within the earth creating these effects, maybe this was one, and maybe this guy could feel it, but it didn't have any adverse effects on him. He wasn't allergic to it. That's what Albert says. Some people are allergic to these forces and they have a reaction. But to them, it's very real. It's, they don't know this is not happening, while others are not allergic to them and they have no reaction whatsoever.
He's suggesting that those forces could create a hallucination for certain individuals.
Absolutely. And one that's very real, that you can't separate from any other experience you've had, from eating your breakfast that morning to going to bed at night. It is very real to the individual. My only problem with that is, of course, there are a number of encounters like this where people are actually driving the car or driving their vehicle.
Right.
So if you were affected by this, why the hell didn't you crash the car? Because you're clearly not under control, or why didn't you fall over? Or and somebody see you stood there as if you were having some kind of strange experience. But, no, what I'm saying is there's no third party evidence to support these incidents. Nobody walked past Alan Godfrey sat looking perplexed in his car that morning,
right?
Or drove past him or whatever,
Right.
And not only that, again, if these forces, we'll call them, forces, surely they would come from the same place a lot. So surely you should have a lot of these encounters, these experiences on that same stretch of road, whereas you don't, So I don't know. I don't know. All I know is that Alan was telling the truth. Whatever is the nature and origin of his experience can be debated forever. But I know I would guarantee he's not lying. It's not a hoax. It's not made up. He's telling the exact truth as he remembered it, without a doubt.
One of the things that Forrest had mentioned earlier was about this area being a hot spot. Do you find as an investigator that there is a high incidence or more stories in this general area?
The problem you have with hotspots is what comes first. Is it the UFO sightings or is it the UFO investigator? It's
Right.
like the old saying, isn't it? You know, if a tree falls over in the forest and there's nobody there, does it still make a noise? You know, science will tell you, yes, it does, but there's nobody there to hear it, of course. So Jenny and other colleagues in these areas were very active in these days, so therefore they received the sightings. So which came first? All you can say is that for whatever reason, a number of sightings were reported, and they may have been higher to other parts of the country simply because in other parts of the country there was nobody to report them to. In the early 80s through to the mid 1980s, like I told you, we had a lot of sightings from a semi-rural area in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, and they made its way to us, but we made ourselves very visible in those areas. We would do talks there, we'd leave leaflets on pub notice boards at police officers' stations and all kind. When people used to phone us or contact us, we used to ask them how they'd found us. You know, that way we knew, you know, what approach was working. You know, and we had a lot of sightings reported to us, but it may be in the other parts of the country there was nobody to report them to. Therefore, you've got no statistics. So all you can say is that you can call it a hotspot. We used to call them window areas. Now the portals, same thing, different name. You know, so you have to ask which came first. But yes, there were a lot of sightings, but we also know through experience that most UFO sightings, irrespective of who they're reported to, have a conventional explanation. So, you know, let's not forget that.
You often hear people say, oh, it's 95% is a mundane or prosaic explanation. What do you think that percentage is corrected for today?
And no, I think, you know, people repeat that simply because it's what has always been said. You know, at some point that percentage will have cropped up and people just repeat it without any evidence to support it. In my experience, and this is the stuff that's come my way, I think it's a lot less than that. I think it's less than 1%. Very few. There are a lot of cases where we don't have a conclusion to simply because we don't have enough information. You know, Mr. Smith reports a little light flying across the sky. It could be any damn thing, but there is no way you're going to spend hours and hours trying to track it down, you know. But it'll be a drone or a firework or, you know, an aircraft, more than likely. I live a mile from the motorway. At the other side of the motorway, we have a big retail park and a big entertainment park, and they have things outside, and sometimes they have these huge spotlights into the sky, and they're spinning around. So when you drive up the motorway and it's low cloud, they don't half look weird on the clouds, you know, but the locals know what they are. I've seen reports of those this year online. People saying, oh, look at this, look at this, look at this. I'm thinking, no, you idiot. I know exactly what that is, but I'm not going to waste my time trying to tell you, you know?
Right.
So in my experience, the things that, you know, leave you scratching your head are few and far between. And I would argue that Alan's case is one of those.
Right.
Well, out of the cases of what you think might be genuine high strangeness or just statistically reporting, do you think there are any areas in the UK that get an abnormally high number of events or reporting?
Again, it's difficult to say. I've just written a piece for a colleague of mine in Scotland. And again, there's an area in Scotland you drive past and not take a second look at. You know, I've been there. It's called Bonnybridge. And for whatever reason, in the 1990s, they had a lot of reports from the Bonnybridge area. And my colleague Malcolm Robinson and his colleague Ron Halliday are writing a book about it. And they asked me to write a piece. What did I think was behind these sightings? I don't really know, but for some reason they were reported. And again, you know, the investigators were there to look into them. And most of them are prosaic. You know, they're strange lights, could be anything. But there are certainly, what we can say is that there are areas from time to time that, for whatever reason, do have a lot of reports come from them. Now, whether it's more than any other area remains to be seen. But what we did in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, just outside of the town of Skipton, there's some moors. And there's no sheep or any livestock. It's mainly game birds. So they have grouse and pheasant. And come August, the they blow the things to smithereens, they shoot them. And so in and amongst these areas, we had a lot of sightings. So what we did, I forget what year it was early 80s, we literally put a caravan on the top of these moors and we manned it for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for a whole week. And we put signposts saying Skywatch, UFO Skywatch, and we did some local media, and we encouraged the local inhabitants from the towns around to come and visit us and tell us what they'd seen. And what we found, that the reports that we were receiving at that time were nothing new. They went back decades, same type of sightings. But of course, decades ago, there was nobody to report them to. And not only that, we found out there was other strange phenomena in these areas. There was witchcraft practice there. There was the black dog stories and all kinds of stuff, I'll give you an example. One of our members was a police sergeant in the area. He got called out one night to a burglary. It was an elderly couple. They'd been out for the evening. They come back home. They said they'd been burgled. So he turns up at their house and he said, "What's been stolen?" And they said, "Nothing." And he's thinking, "Hang on a minute, you've called me out on a burglary and you're telling me that nothing's been stolen." So he said, what's the problem? He said, "Look at all our ornaments. They've all been turned upside down while we were out. There's no forced entry. The door's still locked. All the windows are intact, but they were all turned upside down." He had all these things in the same sort of locale, the same geographical area. Whether they're connected or not is another argument. So yes, there are hotspots, and we see that, for example, 1989, 1990, it was Belgium with the Belgian triangles. That was a hotspot. We had a lot of sightings here in the mid 1980s. Before that, if you go to the early 80s, it was upstate New York. They had all the triangles seen there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back, I mentioned the Pascagoula case from 1973 in Mississippi. When you study the incidents there, you'll find out that the whole of the United States that year had a flap of high strangeness sightings. A chap called David Webb penned a book on it called 1973, The Year of the Humanoids. And it wasn't just in 1 month, it was across the states.
I know that book. Yeah.
And Kevin Randall, I've just published his book, and it's called 1973, the year of UFO sightings, humanoids, abductions, and landings. And he highlights some of the other cases from that year. There are times and locations that will have a spate of sightings, but then there's larger geographical areas that will spread even further and even longer. But it all depends on if there's anybody there to investigate them in the first place or to report them to,
Yeah, Alan himself said towards the end of his book, given what happened to him, which we're going to talk about more and when we do part 2 of our series, but the aftermath, he said, had he known everything that was coming, he wouldn't have reported it.
Absolutely. And like I said, Alan was a decorated police officer, well respected. He asked for permission to go on the record officially from his chief constable. He couldn't get any higher than that,
Yeah.
in uniform. And they gave him permission. So Alan, did some newspaper coverage, he did some TV coverage in uniform. And it was the worst thing he could have ever done because they made his life a misery. I know Alan mentioned it at the time, afterwards, but not a lot. They wanted to get rid of him. But yet they'd given him permission to do that. They could have just said no.
If I remember correctly, they even asked him to do this one particular interview. They said, do this.
Well, you have to remember as well, Alan got injured in a pub fight, and he lost a testicle, right?
Yeah.
And they took him from his patrol vehicle and said he had to ride a bicycle.
Yeah, I did read about that.
Which, with his injury, is not the kind of thing you want to be doing. And they knew about this. This will also give you an idea. When Alan had finished, he's come out of the force, he had his call, a leaving celebration in a local pub. And the pub licensing hours meant you had to stop serving alcohol at 10:30 in the evening. Officers from his own police station raided the pub after 10:30 to see if they were still serving beer after hours.
Yeah.
Bonkers. So I don't blame him. When you talk about it, people like Alan had a much more to lose than they did to gain by going on the record. And Alan paid the price. is an example of that.
That's going to wrap up part 1 of our 2-part series on the paranormal cold case of Zigmund Adamski. We'll be back next week with part 2, our second to last show of 2023. Don't forget to find and subscribe to the other 2 shows on the Astonishing Legends Network, The Midnight Library and Scared All the Time. Both are available wherever you get your podcasts.
Astonishing Legends is edited by Sarah Voorhees-Wendell at VW Sound and co-produced by Tess Feifel, who is also head of research and the social media manager. Our technical producer is Ed Vicola, or as we call him, the Mechanic. Special thanks to our announcer, John Boland.
Hi, I'm Catherine Carlson.
Hi, I'm Tristan Carlson.
Hi, I'm David Mars.
Galaxy-wide and in perpetuity. I understand this is with no implied promise of present or future compensation.
How to spell my name? M-A-R-R-S.
I understand this is with no implied promise of present or future compensation.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane at foundermusic.com. All other music and sound design for the show is composed and created by Alan Carestia.
Our logo was created by Tommy Beaver Design, and our animated graphics for social media and YouTube are done by Joshua Sloan at deadstreetproductions.com.
Every episode going back to September of 2020 has a transcription available on its corresponding webpage at our website. Earlier transcriptions can be made available upon request to astonishingcontact@gmail.com.
Astonishing Legends would not be possible without you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Instagram, Twitter, Discord, Facebook, and YouTube.
You can also visit us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to additional bonus content, including the Patreon exclusive show, Astonishing Junk Drawer, which is available every week. The main show is not. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.